Terry and I have been together a while. He knows the order. I don't think I've ever finished a sermon until I had to speak. And people who know me watch me, and they can see me fiddling and scribbling and adjusting, and it is the way it is. Thankfully, Terry gave my introduction. That saved me a little bit of focus. Grateful for that. Nice to be able to share Sabbath and broadcast out wherever this goes. My parents taught me not to lie, but they also taught me that Santa Claus was real. So there's a disconnect there at some level. And they sent me to church. And at church they taught me not to lie, but they taught me that I needed to go to church on Sunday. Again, there's some kind of disconnect there. The problem has never been, did we know not to lie, but the application of it got murky at times. So when I began to attend the Church of God, again, we knew not to lie. And for the first time in my life, you actually stopped lying. That was the difference for me. Church of God, you actually did what we said we would do, best we understood. So I stopped lying when I came into the Church of God. That was a change. Well, okay, I didn't need someone to tell me not to lie. I needed God's Spirit to direct me to follow His words and to finish it. Well, then if you go beyond how to live this Christian life, at some point in time there's information that's necessary to understand what the body of Scripture is. And the body of this Bible is not, do not lie. The body of this Bible is, who is God? What is He doing? What is the plan of salvation? And how is that described in the record that He gave us? So I would just say that's where my search has reached out and tried to be fulfilled. Who God was. Strange that I would be in the service of God within His church within range of 50 years. I'm closing in on couple of years of hitting my 50. I always thought these people that were at 50 years, they're just like you would never arrive at, but it comes, in time it comes. So the church, when I walked in the door, didn't actually teach me who God was. They taught me that God the Father was Jesus Christ. Well, I didn't know that. And I learned that actually fairly recently, that wasn't true. Then what God is doing had to change. Terry mentioned that. All of a sudden, the symbolism laid out in the festivals now starts to move and adjust because we didn't quite understand. If you don't know who He is, then you're probably not going to know what He's doing. On the macro, He's bringing mankind to salvation. Okay, that's the macro, but there's steps to that. There's a process to that. And that's laid out in His festivals. And so now our understanding of those festivals is adjusting as God, I believe, opens our eyes to see Him more clearly. There's a third level to that, is how is what God is doing going to take place? And that goes down the line in, I would say, in critical understanding. It's not at the top, who is God, but it's still part of the process. He's laying out for us what His purposes are. So in the course of my sermon today, The Restoration of Israel is the title for those who have my outline. I want to do just a little bit of house cleaning because I'm talking about a resurrection in the Bible. So the house cleaning is this. The word second resurrection and the word third resurrection, the terminology is not in Scripture. And the best I can say is if you've got 50 years of that in your veins, then it's time to have that bled out a little bit as well. It's not there. And there's a reason it's not there. God called what we would call the third resurrection the second death. You want to pick a term from the Bible. Now, the second resurrection, there is no term that I have that I can replace it with. And frankly, the first resurrection might well be, a friend of mine has suggested it means the greater resurrection as compared to numerology. Well, we'll see how that plays, but it's worth considering. Pacific Church of God, Statement of Beliefs, under resurrection, I'll read you just a piece of it, has been edited to update the fact that we don't use these terms that aren't in Scripture. And here's how it reads. After the return of Christ, all those who have died, having never had the opportunity for salvation, will be resurrected back to physical life for a period of judgment. That's what it says. That's true. But it doesn't say the when, the how, and the why. It's simply edited down to say everybody's going to have their opportunity. They're going to come back if they haven't already come up in the resurrection to eternal life, and they're going to physically have that chance unless they've already received judgment. So the statement's wider than that, but I want to address resurrection today to life, to flesh, and I want to put it in the context of God's plan. And you know what? It is not what they taught me in college. I wish they would have taught me in college. I could have spent those 50 years building on the foundation of the truth instead of trying to discount what ultimately became, as I understand it, the truth. But here we are. Go forward from here. God gives me life and time. This is what I will do. I want to start with an explanation first of the Jubilee, because there's a connection here in Leviticus 25 that I want to address. So Leviticus 25, and I want to start just in verse number 1. It says, Jehovah spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the children of Israel. Say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, then the land shall keep a Sabbath to Jehovah. 6 years you'll sow your field, 6 years prune your vineyard, gather its fruit. In the 7th year there'll be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to Jehovah. Neither sow your field, prune your vineyard, what grows of its own accord of your harvest you will not reap. Gather the grapes of your untended vine. It is a year of rest for the land. The Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you, your male, female servants, your hired man, the stranger who dwells with you, your livestock and your beasts. All its produce shall be for food. Now, I read the initial part because these are 7-year cycles that go through to a greater fulfillment. Verse number 8. You shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years will be to you 49 years. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement. You shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land. It says you consecrate the 50th year. And it's interesting, it indicates that you're consecrating it in this order as it's being proclaimed. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It'll be a jubilee for you. Each of you return to his possession. Okay, that's very important. Each of you return to his family. If you were sold into servitude, there would be a time in your life when your bills would be completely cleared and you could go home. If you had sold your land and because of debts or other obligations, there would be a time in your life when you could go back home free and clear. The 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of its own accord, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine. It is jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You will eat the produce from the field. In this year of Jubilee, verse 13, each of you shall return to his possession. Now, it's really important that we grasp and understand the symbolism of this. God is saying that there is a time in his plan when you will return to your land. He'll restore you to fulfill what he intended for you ultimately to begin with. Now, I want to look at Isaiah 27 because we're going to connect to this. Sometimes we just take the easy answer, and the easy answer isn't necessarily even true. Isaiah 27, verse number 12. Now, it's talking about end-time events now, prophetic events, and it's going to tie this back into what we just read in Leviticus 25. Who is God? All right? I think we arrived at that understanding. What is he doing? I think we're in process of arriving at that understanding. How will that be done? Well, here's part of how that will be done. It shall come to pass in that day, Isaiah 27, verse 12, that Jehovah will thresh from the channel of the river to the brook of Egypt. Okay, so we're talking a specific area where the reference is made from effectively the Euphrates over to the Nile. So, you'll be gathered one by one, O you children of Israel. God says, I'm going to gather you up and I'm going to bring you home. It's going to be a jubilee, actually. You're coming back to your land. It'll be in that day the great trumpet will be blown. What trumpet? The trumpet of the jubilee, not the seventh trump. This isn't a resurrection. These are people that are being brought back physically to the land of Israel, their inheritance. The trumpet that was blown on the jubilee here is the great trumpet. They'll come, who are about to perish in the land of Assyria. They are outcasts in the land of Egypt and will worship Jehovah in the holy mount at Jerusalem. Now that's interesting because that is actually, when you go back to Leviticus 25, that's the point. That this is the fulfillment. Leviticus 25 was just the introduction to the story. The restoration of Israel to the land is fundamentally taught in the book of Ezekiel. And I want to go now to Ezekiel because I really want to go through Ezekiel 37. The dry bones. I can't say that without hearing the song. You know, it always comes back into my mind. But I want to then show you how consistent Ezekiel 37 is with other parts of Scripture. And it's where God is going to restore his people. The Jubilee trumpet's going to blow. He's going to bring them back to his land. And you know what? It's going to be before the millennium. See, we always had this concept. And I keep saying, why didn't somebody tell me? Why didn't somebody tell me? Well, I guess we just didn't know. He rises to meet Christ in the air. Christ comes right back down to the earth, and the millennium begins. No. There are very likely years between us rising to meet Christ in the air and the start of the millennium. I say years. I'll show you some of the events. I mean, we have all the bowl plagues poured out. That's after we meet Christ in the air. Well, that's not years, but that's months. There's a process of time there. With that, some of that's been addressed. Temple worship, in my mind, is probably the beginning of the millennium. Temple worship. Now, can I say absolutely God told me, gave me a dream? No, he didn't do that. Take it for what it's worth. I believe that's probably the beginning of the millennium. But regardless, I do want to show scripturally, not what I think, what the Bible says about the restoration of Israel and when it takes place. But I want to start here. We're going to start in Ezekiel 36 because I want to start in this order. Then we'll move forward to the next chapter where the bones are so graphically addressed. But Ezekiel 36, verse number 6. It says, prophesy concerning the land of Israel. Say to the mountains, the hills, the rivers, and the valleys. This is a physical description. These aren't prophetic in the sense of nations or such. It's actually a physical description. Thus says Jehovah Elohim, God, behold, I've spoken in my jealousy and my fury, because you've borne the shame of the nations. Therefore, thus says Jehovah God, I have raised my hand in an oath that surely the nations that are around you shall bear their own shame. But you, O mountains of Israel, you shall shoot forth your branches, yield your fruit to my people Israel. They are about to come. Whoa, it says, bring forth abundance. My people are coming home. So the land is being prepared for Israel to return. I don't know the scale. I don't know how God works and where he draws his line and who the numbers are. God knows that. But he tells us what the events are. And brethren, I think we should understand. For indeed I am for you, I will turn to you, you shall be tilled and sown. I will multiply men upon you, all the house of Israel, all of it. and the cities shall be inhabited, and the ruins rebuilt. I'll multiply upon you men and beasts. They will increase and bear young. This is physical. This is a physical return of physical people to the land of Israel. I'll make you inhabited as in former times, and do better for you than at your beginnings. Then you shall know that I am Jehovah. Yes, I'll cause men to walk on you, my people Israel. They shall take possession of you. You shall be their inheritance. No more shall you bereave them of children. So this is a physical event portrayed by the Jubilee. The great trumpet is on the Day of Atonement. So I'm not speaking on atonement this year. Mark Sappington is. But I hope in the course of this, by covering something, chances are he won't, then it can be put together at least in understanding that day. Again, understanding God's plan through the festivals more clearly. Now, if you go on then down, Ezekiel 36 and verse number 16. It says, moreover, a word of Jehovah came to me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their own ways and deeds. To me, their way was like the uncleanness of a woman in her customary impurity. Therefore, I poured out my fury on them for the blood they had shed on the land, and for their idols which they had defiled it. So I scattered them among the nations. They were dispersed throughout the countries. So he's going back now, and he's telling some of the rest of the story, which is told in actually many places throughout Scripture. I judged them according to their ways and their deeds, and when they came to the nations, wherever they went, they profaned my holy name. They were an embarrassment, but then they were not in obedience to God. And God just said he scattered them. They went out into the nations, but he's saying right here, I'm bringing them back. I'm going to fulfill my promise. I'm going to return them to their heritage. Going down to verse number 24. I will take you from among the nations. So we're not just talking the Euphrates to the Nile. I mean, there's different parts of the description. He's taking them from among the nations. He's going to gather them out of all countries and to bring them into your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. I'll cleanse you from all your filthiness and from all your idols. I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. You take away Satan and people will have a new heart. It's that simple. Now, is there more? Yes, there's more. You just take away Satan and people will have a new heart. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh, give you a heart of flesh. I'll put my spirit within you, cause you to walk in my statutes. You'll keep my judgments and do them. Then you shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers, and you shall be my people. I will be your God. Now again, that's very specific and very clear. Verse number 33, down a little further. Thus says Jehovah God, on the day that I cleanse you from all your iniquities, I will also enable you to dwell in the cities, and the ruins shall be rebuilt. The desolate land shall be tilled instead of lying desolate in the sight of all who pass by. And they will say, this land was desolate. This land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden. Well, that's what the millennium is going to be ultimately, is the Garden of Eden filling as it expands out into the earth. And the wasted, desolate, and ruined cities are now fortified and inhabited. Then the nations which are left all around you shall know that I, Jehovah, have rebuilt the ruined places and planted what was desolate. God does it. Now, he can do it through man, or he can prepare it before man was even there. I, Jehovah, have spoken it. I will do it. Thus says Jehovah God, I will also let the house of Israel inquire of me to do this for them. I will increase their men like a flock. Like a flock offered as holy sacrifices, like the flock at Jerusalem on its feast days, so shall the ruined cities be filled with flocks of men. They shall know that I am Jehovah. It's a fascinating story. This is premillennial. That's my argument. I want to show you in terms of the events that are taking place. The millennium is when everything is in order. You don't start out, we've talked, again, we go up, meet Christ in the air, Christ come down, millennium begins. It doesn't. There are many, many things that take place. Now, with that as a basis, then, let's go to look at the dry bones of Ezekiel 37. Start in verse number 1. I want to just read the 14 verses on this passage because it's a story and it's familiar, but it's important in terms of our focus. It says, the hand of the Lord, there's no break here. We break it, yes, it's a chapter. And we say, okay, here's a chapter, a new story. Get halfway through the chapter, another new story. Well, not always. Sometimes, but not always. In this case, no. There's one story here. It flows from chapter 36, and it continues through to the end of chapter 37. And that, frankly, I think the flow continues on down through chapters all the way down to chapter 40. I think there's a flow of events. The hand of Jehovah came upon me, brought me out in the spirit of Jehovah, set me down in the midst of the valley, and it was full of bones. Okay, now we're seeing a vision, all right? This isn't a literal event, it was a vision. Okay, then he caused me to pass by them all around. Behold, there were very many in the open valley. Indeed, they were very dry. It indicates time has passed. And they're out there bleached out. And he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? I answered, O Jehovah God, you know. And he said to me, prophesy to these bones, say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Jehovah. Thus says Jehovah God, actually it's Lord God there, it's in lowercase. It's hard for me, and I got to speak as slow as I read here, but surely I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. I'll put sinews on you, bring flesh upon you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, you shall live. Then you shall know that I am Jehovah. We would agree this is a resurrection from the grave, okay? And it's not just a valley full of bones that God stored up someplace. It's a vision. It's a portrayal. So I prophesied as it was commanded. And as I prophesied, there was a noise, suddenly a rattling. Bones came together, bone to bone. Indeed, I looked, the sinews and the flesh came upon them. The skin covered them over, but there was no breath in them. And he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man. Say to the breath, thus says Lord God, Lord Jehovah. Excuse me for sometimes having to stop and catch that. I suppose in the Bibles they use where they've written it in, but then I couldn't read it because it's in language that I'm just not quite up to speed on. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me. Breath came into them, and they lived, stood on their feet, an exceeding great army. And he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. This isn't all of mankind. We can't use this as an example for all of mankind. This is exactly what it says. It is the whole house of Israel being resurrected to physical life so that God can bring them and restore them in the land according to the promise. And this whole process begins with the blowing of the trumpet on the Jubilee, which is the Day of Atonement, which is, you know what? Before the Feast of Tabernacles, is it not? Even in portrayal of the feast days is before the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, it's before for a reason. They indeed say, our bones are dry, our hope is lost, and we ourselves are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, thus says Lord Jehovah, behold, O my people, I will open your graves, I will cause you to come up from your graves, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. Same story, same explanation. Then you shall know that I am Jehovah, when I have opened your graves, O my people, brought you up from your graves. I'll put my spirit in you, and you shall live. I'll place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I, Jehovah, have spoken it and performed it, says Jehovah. So the story there is very familiar to us, but understand the context. As Terry said, this isn't some 100-year period after everything else is already over. No, this is actually on the Day of Atonement being portrayed, which is the run-up and the preparation for the establishment of the millennium. And that's where it fits. And you know what? That's where the story is supposed to go. So let's, again, look at a few places where that would be confirmed. Isaiah 29 and verse number 22. Isaiah 29:22. Therefore thus says Jehovah, who redeemed Abraham, concerning the house of Jacob. Jacob shall not now be ashamed, nor shall his face now grow pale, but when he sees his children, the children of Jacob, the descendants of Jacob, when he sees his children, the work of my hands in his midst, he's going to be there with them. They will hallow my name. They will hallow the Holy One of Jacob and fear the God of Israel. These also who erred in spirit will come to understanding, and those who complained will learn doctrine. This is a reference to Ezekiel 37, maybe not directly, but to the same thing as Ezekiel 37. Well, let's look at Isaiah 65. I gave a sermon at the feast on God the Father coming down to the earth, and there'd been so many references to Zechariah 14. I just said, you know what? I'm going to give the sermon, and I'm not going to go to Zechariah 14 one time. Well, you could very easily give this sermon and never go to Ezekiel 37 one time. It's everywhere, and it fits. Isaiah 65, verse number 8. I will be there. Verse number 8. Thus says Jehovah, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and one says, do not destroy it, for a blessing is in it, so I will do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all. I will bring forth descendants from Jacob, and from Judah an heir of my mountains. My elect shall inherit it, and my servants shall dwell there. And it just says they're going to be descendants, and they're going to dwell in his mountains, in his land. They're going to do just exactly what God prophesied. Go over to chapter 66, start in verse number 5. Hear the word of Jehovah. You who tremble at his word, your brethren who hated you, who cast you out for my name's sake, said, let Jehovah be glorified, that we may see your joy, but they shall be ashamed. The sound of noise from the city, a voice from the temple, the voice of Jehovah, who fully repays his enemies. Now notice the description. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. It's like people that have a baby and they come into labor and they say, let's go to the hospital, and the baby's in the car already. I mean, that has happened indeed to friends of ours. The baby's there before the taxi shows up. So it's talking about before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, she delivered a male child. Well, who's heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Shall a nation be born at once? And the answer is yes. It's going to happen. The nation of Israel is going to be born in one day. It's going to be born at once. For as soon as Zion was in labor, remember Zion is the location and the people of the location and the descendants of that location, she gave birth to her children. Shall I bring to the time of birth and not cause delivery, says Jehovah? Who cause delivery, shut up the womb, says your God. Rejoice with Jerusalem. Be glad with her, all you who love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all you who mourn for her, that you may feed and be satisfied with the consolation of her bosom, that you may drink deeply and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. For thus says Jehovah, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, the glory of the Gentiles like a flowing stream. Then you shall feed on her side, you will be carried, be dandled on her knees, as one whom his mother comforts. So I will comfort you, and you will be comforted in Jerusalem. He's saying, God's people, Israel, the children of Jacob, are going to be comforted in Jerusalem. It's Ezekiel 37. They're brought back to the land, and it's just exactly what God says. Now, in going through Ezekiel 37, I've tried to break it up into pieces because on the one hand, it's a story flow, but on the other hand, the confirmation of each piece of the story is in other books, and I want to show you those as we go. So if we go back to then Ezekiel 37, verse number 15, we go to the same story instead of another story at another time in a different place. No, the same story. This is Israel coming up, and it's in preparation for establishing the millennium. So, Ezekiel 37:15. Again, the word of Jehovah came to me, saying, As for you, son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it for Judah and for the children of Israel, his companions. Take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. Well, first of all, you got to have them there. Then once they're there, now you can put them together. Okay, God's restoring his people. Then join them one to another for yourself into one stick, and they will become one in your hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, Will you not show us what you mean by these? Say to them, Thus says Lord Jehovah, Surely I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his companions, and I will join them with it with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick. And they'll become one in my hand, and the sticks on which you write will be in your hand before their eyes. All right, so let's look at some of the instructions in prophecy about Israel and Judah coming together, being gathered together, return to their land, and then be one nation. Let's go to Jeremiah in this case. We'll go to Jeremiah 23. Jeremiah 23 says, Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says Jehovah. Therefore thus says Jehovah God of Israel against the shepherds who feed my people. You've scattered my flock, driven them away, not attended to them. Behold, I will attend to you for the evil of your doings, says Jehovah. I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I have driven them. This is everywhere. It's in the prophecies all over the Bible record. And I'll bring them back to their folds, and they'll be fruitful and increase. I'll set up shepherds over them who will feed them. They'll fear no more, nor be dismayed, nor shall they be lacking, says Jehovah. Behold, the days are coming, says Jehovah. I'll raise to David a branch of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper to execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will dwell safely. We're talking about going on down into the millennial reign of Jesus Christ with those of the first fruits who are there to reign with him. And now this is his name by which he will be called, Jehovah our righteousness. His name's not Jehovah. His name is like the name of God is our righteousness. Okay. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says Jehovah, that they shall no longer say, As Jehovah lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, but as Jehovah lives, who brought up and led the descendants of the house of Israel from the north country and from all the countries where I had driven them. So again, we're not just talking Euphrates to the Nile. I mean, different portrayals describe different elements of what God chooses to do here. They shall dwell in their own land. Well, there it's the same. It's what the Bible says. Well, God will do what he says. He said, you think I'm going to bring to delivery and not have a child born? He will. In one day, he said, in one day. Jeremiah 50, verse number 4, is again reference to this. Verse 4, Jeremiah 50. In those days and in that time, says Jehovah, the children of Israel shall come, they and the children of Judah together. With continual weeping they shall come, seek Jehovah their God. They shall ask the way to Zion. This is a process. I don't know how long it's going to take. It's a process, though, where God prepares the land, says, bring forth bud fruit. Make yourself ready. People, my people, are about to come. And when they come into the land, God miraculously has to bring them. He miraculously brought them out of Egypt. He's going to miraculously bring them out of the countries they're in. And some of this, because you don't know exactly where the line is, some of this is a gathering of people who are in other lands, and some of this is the resurrection of the people and then be restored to the land. And God says, I'm going to put them all back together, I'm going to bring them home. And that's where the Jubilee comes in, and the trumpet of the Jubilee on the Day of Atonement is the beginning of that. It's the call. They shall ask the way to Zion with their faces toward it, saying, Come, let us join ourselves to Jehovah in a perpetual covenant that will not be forgotten. Well, then Hosea. Hosea chapter 1. I'll be there in verse number 10. Again, I'm breaking into the middle of certain passages, but Hosea 1 verse 10 just says, Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered, and it shall come to pass in the place where it was said of them, You are not my people, because they rebelled and God sent them off into captivity. There it shall be said of them, You are sons of the living God. Well, there you go. That's restoration on the fullest possible sense. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, the two sticks, all right, and appoint for themselves one head. They shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, mercy is shown. Again, very same thing, same point. Israel is going to be gathered and restored with their brothers and sisters in Judah and become one nation again. And then God is going to bring them into the land, and they're going to dwell there, and they're going to increase and prosper. So go back then, Ezekiel 37. Again, showing the context here. Verse number 21 starts a reference here. Ezekiel 37, verse 21. Excuse me, let me go on down. All right, 21 would be correct. Then say to them, Thus says the Lord Jehovah, Surely I will take the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they've gone. I'll gather them from every side, bring them into their own land. I'll make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. One king shall be king over them all. They shall no longer be two nations, nor shall they ever be divided into two kingdoms again. They shall not defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with the detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions, but I will deliver them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned. I'll cleanse them. They'll be my people. I will be their God. David, my servant, shall be king over them. This is the same passage. This is the same context. David's going to be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments, observe my statutes, and do them. Then they shall dwell in the land that I have given to Jacob my servant, where your fathers dwelt. They'll dwell there, they, their children, and their children's children forever. And my servant David shall be there forever. Moreover, well, let me do that. Let me save the moreover to the next step. It's hard not to just keep reading the story. To me, it's incredible. It's exciting. It's simply true. So then Jeremiah 30. Let's go back till you have a good opportunity to practice turning back and forth. But Jeremiah 30, verse number 1. The word that came to Jeremiah from Jehovah, saying, Thus speaks Jehovah, God of Israel, saying, Write in a book for yourself all the words I have spoken to you, for behold, the days are coming, says Jehovah. I will bring back from captivity my people Israel and Judah, says Jehovah. I'll cause them to return to the land I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. So we used to portray that there'd be big concentration camps somewhere in Germany or Syria or Europe, and all the Israel's going to be inside, and then they're coming out of captivity. They went into captivity, Israel did, and never returned. God's bringing back the captivity, those who went captive. I was wondering about that. There aren't enough planes. Well, there's going to be even less planes tomorrow than there was yesterday because they're parking them. Well, at least they're empty, right? Well, whether or not there is a form of slavery or captivity or bondage, it's going to be indeed to Satan's system, that people who buy into that and submit themselves to it. But when he talks about bringing back the captivity, it's the people who went into captivity. They're what God is bringing back, their descendants. And they never have returned and been restored to their land. Now these are the words that Jehovah spoke concerning Israel and Judah. Thus says Jehovah, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, not of peace. Ask now and see whether a man is ever in labor with child. So why do I see every man with his hands on his loins like a woman in labor, and all faces turn pale? Alas, that day is great, and there's none like it. It's the time of Jacob's trouble. Okay, this is before the millennium, all right? But he shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, says Jehovah of hosts, I will break his yoke from your neck. I will burst your bonds. Foreigners shall no more enslave them. They shall serve Jehovah their God and David their king, whom I will raise up for them. So it's not saying, well, this happens and the next day this happens. It's telling you the story. But as I've said, the story is everywhere. The story is throughout Scripture. Go back to Ezekiel in 34. In this case, I've tried to walk through the pieces where I'm not repeating the specific verses because again, they're told in a more continuous element the way they're recorded. But in Ezekiel 34, in this case, verse number 11, thus says Lord Jehovah, indeed, I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock on the day that he is among his scattered sheep, I will seek out my sheep and deliver them out of places where they were scattered on a dark and cloudy day, cloudy and dark day. I'll bring them out from the peoples, gather them from the countries, and bring them into their own land. I'll feed them on the mountains of Israel, in the valleys and in the inhabited places of the country. I'll feed them in good pasture. Their fold shall be on high mountains of Israel. They shall lie down in a good fold, feed in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I will feed my flock. I'll make them lie down, says Lord Jehovah. I will seek what was lost, bring back what was driven away, bind up the broken, strengthen what was sick. I'll deliver the fat, but I will destroy the fat and the strong and feed them in judgment. Do you think God's going to raise up a people, and part of those people are still bitter and in rebellion? He's going to bring them back and start the millennium with a bunch of people that are fighting and gnawing on each other and stealing their neighbor's goods. No, it's not going to happen. God says he's going to make a sort. He'll bring people up. He'll bring people that are coming to him and willing to come to him in service and obedience and humility. And if you are not, God's making the judgment before you ever come into the land. He's not going to take a bunch of rebels and try to build a kingdom out of them. He's going to make that sort before it ever takes place. I will destroy the fat, the strong, and I will feed them in judgment. Going down to verse 20. Therefore, thus says the Lord Jehovah to them, behold, I myself will judge between the fat and the lean sheep. Because you have pushed with side and shoulder, butted all the weak ones with your horns, scattered them abroad, therefore I will save my flock, and they'll no longer be a prey. I will judge between sheep and sheep, right? We're not talking sheep and goats. We're not talking, grizzly bears and sheep. I'm going to judge between sheep and sheep. I'll establish one shepherd over them. He shall feed them, my servant David, the sheep that are willing to feed on God's pasture. The other ones aren't going to be there. They're not going to return to the land. He shall feed them and be their shepherd, and I, Jehovah, will be their God, and my servant David, a prince among them, I, Jehovah, have spoken. Boy, it's everywhere. Well, how do we miss that? I don't know. Maybe we never looked. Maybe we just trusted that everything would be okay, do what we were told, repeat after me, and you're going to be in the kingdom. I don't think so. I don't think that's quite as simple as it gets. In the book of Amos, chapter 9, in this case, starting in verse 11, where it says, Israel will be restored, my New King James. On that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages. I'll raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom. all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says Jehovah, who does this thing. Behold, the days are coming, says Jehovah. Well, now look at it. Well, we know what this is, all right. Well, look at how it connected to everything else. The days are coming, says Jehovah, the plowman will overtake the reaper, the treader of grapes, him who sows seed. The mountains shall drip with sweet wine, all the hills shall flow into it. I'll bring back the captives of my people Israel. They shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. One time God says, I'll do it. And here he says they'll do it. Well, they'll do it by God's power and direction. They shall plant vineyards and drink wine from them. They also shall make gardens and eat fruit from them. I will plant them in their land, and no longer shall they be pulled up from the land I've given them, says Jehovah your God. Now, as I said, the stories here are continuous in the places where they're told. What I'm trying to do is thread together some of the supporting scriptures that match and put them in those categories. So let's go back then to Ezekiel 37 again, and we'll continue where I almost continued a little bit too soon. Ezekiel 37, and in this case, verse number 26. Okay, so this is after David is their king. Verse 26, moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. Well, what would that be? A covenant of peace. Wow. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. I will establish them and multiply them. I will set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. That's why I've been arguing, at least in part, we should at least consider that the millennium starts where God's temple worship has been reestablished in the land. Okay, he sets his sanctuary, and he says, my tabernacle shall be with them. Indeed, I'll be their God, and they shall be my people. The nations will know that I, Jehovah, sanctify Israel when my sanctuary is in their midst forever. A covenant of peace. Well, what would a covenant of peace be? Well, how about it would be peace? How about the animals would be tame? How about the fact people would not be allowed to pillage and destroy and riot and cause destruction? How about that? How about they're not allowed to take advantage of their neighbor? Well, all right, so then go back to Ezekiel 34, because these are in layers as you go forward. But Ezekiel 34 and verse number 25 states, this is after David will be their king again, I'll make a covenant of peace with them and cause wild beasts to cease from the land. They'll dwell safely in the wilderness and sleep in the woods. I'll make them in the places all around my hill a blessing. I'll cause showers to come down in their season. There'll be showers of blessing. Then the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. The earth shall yield its increase. They'll be safe in their land. They shall know that I am Jehovah when I have broken the bands of their yoke, delivered them from the hand of those who enslaved them. They shall no longer be prey for the nations, nor shall beasts of the land devour them. They shall dwell safely. No one shall make them afraid. I'll raise up for them a garden of renown. They'll no longer be consumed with hunger in the land, nor bear the shame of the Gentiles any more. Thus they shall know that I, Jehovah their God, am with them, and they, the house of Israel, are my people, says the Lord Jehovah. Now, if we then just go down to verse 31, one last verse. You are my flock, the flock of my pasture. You are men, and I am your God, says the Lord Jehovah. Somebody years back took exception to sermons that I had given, proclaiming the record of God the Father and Jesus Christ in the record of Scripture. And he took exception to the fact that I referred to God the Father as a shepherd. I said the chief shepherd is God the Father, and the good shepherd is Jesus Christ. Well, you know what? That was just not emotionally satisfying to that person and to the people that were wanting him to kind of check on me and keep track. So we would sit down when there were meetings. He'd get out his yellow pad, literally pages on his yellow pad. He said, Mark, I've listened to your sermon so much, I can actually imitate your voice. He said, I can use the vocal inflections you use and speak, and it will be said the way you would say it. Wow, you're very interested in getting the goods, I guess, or something. But we had this discussion, and I remember specifically one time. He didn't like the fact that God the Father was a shepherd, because the chief shepherd was going to have to be Jesus Christ. I said, well, I tell you what, does God have a flock? Is there a flock of God? He goes, yeah. Well, then God has a flock, but he's not a shepherd. So what does he do? Go hire one? He has to go get somebody else to do it for him? No, it's not what it says. It says right here, you are my flock, the flock of my pasture. His flock are the sheep. He is the shepherd, the chief shepherd. Christ is the good shepherd. But he's not chiefer than the shepherd that he is the servant of. That's just not how that takes place. So then on my notes I have, all right, the whole enchilada. Hopefully that's okay with people that eat enchiladas. Don't feel like I'm abusing their terms. The whole enchilada, Isaiah 11. We'll just read it in one place, because we've used this verse for decades. We've used parts of it heavily and parts of it hardly ever at all, because we only wanted to make a point. You know what? Everybody's going to be nice. The animal's going to be nice. Children are going to be good, and they're going to play together. Well, there's a whole lot more to it than that. Isaiah 11. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of Jehovah shall rest upon him, Spirit of wisdom and understanding, Spirit of counsel and might, Spirit of knowledge and the fear of Jehovah. You know what? The passage that talks about the animals being nice also talks about the fear of God. There's going to have the fear of God built into that system. His delight is in the fear of Jehovah. His delight is in the fear of Jehovah. He shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness he will judge the poor, decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. Now, how many times have you heard that quoted from Isaiah 11 during the feast? He's going to strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. Well, not too often. And with the breath of his lips he'll slay the wicked. Righteousness will be the belt of his loins, faithfulness the belt of his waist. Verse 6, it's like this came out of nowhere. The wolf will dwell with the lamb. Excuse me, this is a whole story. It's all of it. It's not just part of it. The wolf also will dwell with the lamb. Leopard shall lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion, the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. Nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole. The weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And you just keep reading on down. In that day, there'll be a root of Jesse who will stand as a banner to the people. For the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. It'll come to pass in that day that, now it says Lord lowercase, someday go take all the emanations, whatever they are, of the Sophorim, all right, and mark every one of them in your Bible. Because I've had people come up to me and try to tell me that, well, that's really not what it is, because that's a change, and the Sophorim changed it, and you got to know. So I said, you know what I did? I marked every single one of them in my Bible. And the fact is, they didn't. And so now when the question comes up, I said, well, by the way, you could have that either way the argument flows, because Psalm 110 is where they take that argument, all right, and they try to turn around and say, Jehovah is Jesus Christ. He is not, all right? So like I say, sometimes the argument is because we don't know what supposedly the argument would be. In this case, this is one of those changes or not changes, depending on which side of the argument you take, that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left. All right, still God the Father, all right? From Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, will assemble the outcasts of Israel. Did you know this was in Isaiah 11 with all these animals being nice and the kids out there playing with snakes? It's all here. It's in one place. This is the whole enchilada. Gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. All right, that's bigger than Euphrates to the Nile. All right, we're now keeps expanding on what That depends on what God wants to portray in the story. Also, the envy of Ephraim shall depart. The adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah. Judah will not harass Ephraim. The brothers are going to get along now because we're going to be at peace. We have covenant of peace. They shall fly down upon the shoulder of the Philistines toward the west. Together they shall plunder the people of the east. They shall lay their hand on Edom and Moab. The people of Ammon shall obey them. God's going to expand his dominion. Jehovah will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. With his mighty wind he will shake his fist over the river and strike it in the seven streams, make men cross over dry shod. Notice verse number 16. There will be a highway for the remnant of his people who will be left from Assyria, as it was for Israel in the day that he came up from the land of Egypt. Well, that tells me two things. One, God effectively made a highway for Israel to leave Egypt. All right? However that is, he made that where you just roll right down the road and go where he wanted you to be. So I think movement then was within the range of what God intended. But it says here, this is going to be end time. He'll make a highway for the remnant of his people who be left from Assyria, as it was for Israel in the day that they came up from the land of Egypt. Now, the book of Isaiah talks about this highway three times. Isaiah 35, verse number 8, says, a highway shall be there. It shall be called the highway of holiness. Prepare you the highway of Jehovah. That's the point. Why didn't they tell me that in college? Boy, I could have saved a whole lot of time and energy. Prepare the way of the Lord is a reference to God the Father to go up to Jerusalem to worship him during the millennium. And it's the highway where he brings back his people. So let's go to Isaiah 40 then, and verse number 4. I'll just read it to you so that there's no confusion. Who did John the Baptist ultimately prepare the way for? God the Father. Did he prepare the way for Jesus Christ? Yes. Who did Jesus Christ ultimately prepare the way for? God the Father, not for himself, for the one he served. Isaiah 40 verse 4. In fact, we'll start in verse number 3 here because I think I have it off one verse. Isaiah 40 verse 3. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of Jehovah, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. That's what that means. And it's right here. It's 3 times in the book of Isaiah. Like I said, why didn't they teach me that in college? They could have saved me many, many years. Well, they didn't teach me that in college because my teachers thought that God the Father was Jesus Christ. That's the answer. They thought that God the Father was Jesus Christ. They didn't know. And so all the story then that comes out of that, the record of God was wrong. The meaning of many of the festivals was not correct. In some cases incomplete. In some cases wrong. And there the implication is the story, the prophets, when they tell how is God going to do what he's going to do, it is here. And first you know who God is, then you can know what he's doing, and then you can begin to understand how he's going to do what it is he's going to do. God is opening that. He's beginning to lay this out. If you get to the point where who is God and you say, well, what difference does it make? I'll tell you what difference it makes. You aren't going to learn anything. You'll know no more. You're going to stop when God is opening the door. Prepare the way of Jehovah. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. God's going to restore his people. He's going to begin that process on the trumpet of the day of atonement. And then all of these prophecies will lay out and time will take place as he restores his people and his land. And then at some point, God establishes the millennium itself, and the worship of God in a formal and organized way will take place. Boy, I'd certainly like to know that. I think it makes a big difference.